terms of provision of community infrastructure by way of a school. And thinking of Andrew's question too, and kind of resources that match a community. So,
what is your question?
Well, my question is, I just wonder
L3?
why there's this density in areas where a school is going to be going. Andrew was talking about some of the social outcomes that can give rise with rentals. Yeah, a bit curious.
Yeah, my comments refer to the block below Linwood Park, but my social comments, my comments on social outcomes for the district would apply to the area, would apply to the whole lot. Clearly, there's a lot of L3 already. Outcomes in some of that L3 haven't been a huge success. I would hate to see more of that kind of thing happening in an area which already has some issues that probably could be handled better in different ways.
The L3 that was there it is there currently in the operative plan, which has been transferred into this map for the proposed plan, is in relation to proximity to the city. And the city obviously being the primary KAC, you might say. The new ones, the additional ones, are at the crossroads, the yellow areas on the crossroads, as you say, south of Linwood Park and north and west of East Gate, and then those three areas there. There is the possibility for taking out that area south of Linwood Park on the basis of what you say, but remember that there is a need for intensification, be it in a lower socioeconomic area or not, and there may be other things that might have to support these areas if it does result in some social issues arising. But that's not necessarily a reason not to intensify in certain areas, and there is a need for intensification in areas where people can afford it more perhaps than they could intensification around Merivale.
Yeah, if I can just add to that as well, you mentioned some of the poorer outcomes in that existing living three area. That is one of the reasons why the council has taken a more proactive stance on urban design issues in the last few years. It's development within this area that has in some way been a catalyst towards our further advancing urban design, particularly in the higher density areas. It's particularly Plan Change 53 that introduced urban design assessments, particularly for these higher density areas around L3. I'd expect that through this mechanism, and you were spoken to this morning by our urban design friends, who went through the rationale for that. So we're confident that higher density or high or medium density development going into the future will be of a much higher quality than it is now.
So, unfortunately, though, that urban design plan change, in my view, hasn't worked entirely well. We've got L3 development happening in Richmond, for example, which does nothing to add to the amenity of the local neighbourhood. Quite an eyesore, quite an ugly building. Has a whole bunch of non-compliances, but it still gets consent and it still goes through non-notified. So there is a real feel that in some of the areas like Linwood and Richmond, that we are still imposing a really low quality, low cost housing product on communities that actually ruins their level of amenity. So I'm really concerned. I was interested in the comment that this has been a slow growing area, because as ward councillor, I've seen a lot of L3 and L3 development in this area over the last decade. There has been a lot of new small apartments being built. So why do you think it's been slow to develop? This is one of the reasons that the school went, because people told the government that this was a area that didn't have intensification. No, it's one of the reasons in the report that it wasn't an area of growth. But as a ward councillor, and I lived in this area for a long time, we saw these developments coming on quite a regular basis. So I was just interested to understand.
Probably in the scale of amount that has been zoned comparatively, so proportionally, compared to some other areas which have been taken up.
So if you looked
just
at,
because there is an extensive amount of.
so if you looked at like consenting, for example, could you pinpoint and say, well, the most units that have been built in the last decade have been in this particular area or this area?
We have to come back with you. We can come back.
Because it seems to me there must get a point where you saturate an area with L3 land and you get a number of developments, and then the kind of, it just doesn't become kind of feasible. And kind of I wonder whether this area is kind of at its breaking point now, where it's had so much bad L3 development, that really adding more to it doesn't really enhance it. It starts to quite detract from it.
We'd have to investigate that further. What you're saying may well relate to the existing L3 area, but I don't know that it relates to the proposed medium density extra areas that we've put on this map.
So what if you left this as L2, if you changed it to L2, what would be the impact?
The team is...
I'd have to check, but I believe...
Sorry, it's the
L2.
objectives and policies in the plan with regard to affordable housing relevant here.
Well, that's part of it. That was my comment previously to Councillor Turner, but this is not what Councillor Johansson is asking, is about saturation and the number of consents that have gone through here. My understanding, and I turn to you here, Scott, is that L1 and L2 are roughly becoming the suburban residential zone. That's not what we're proposing here. We're talking about medium density zoning.
But L2 still provides for what, 2 stories, possibly 3 story? What would L2 provide for?
Both L1 and L2 provide for 2 stories. The only real difference between L1 and L2 is what you might call a slightly higher density of development.
Based on site size.
Based on site size.
Minimum.
450 square metres in living 1, 330 in living 2.
That's still quite intense. So 330.
That gives 30 households per hectare.
Yep.
That gives 30 households per hectare. So 300.
So we always considered living 2 zones to be coming towards medium density because,
So that's still quite, I wonder whether we need to have a really good look at Linwood. There's a whole bunch of planning issues associated with it in terms of where you look at Linwood Park, half of that is in residential now anyway. The access, I don't support the access from, it has a canal that goes through it, it's got fences, the access isn't great going through the area south of Linwood Park. And in fact, the roading network is quite difficult. If you think, if you look at Mackworth Street, for example, to get to the mall, it's quite, you have to go quite far around. So, my view would be to take the stuff out south of Linwood Park. That's in some sort of area already, is it? Enhanced development mechanism area, or no?
No, I think it's only the northwest that is.
So which area's got the
Enhanced development?
Yeah.
The north.
John?
The enhanced development mechanism particularly applies to the area to the north of the mall.
So that's Northwich, Maclean, Rona.
I think to the south it's Living 2.
Right. So I can't see the need to, if you've already got an enhanced mechanism in that area, I can't see the need to have it.
Have any intent?
South of Linwood Park.
No, north. If you've got the development mechanism, so I wouldn't support it going further down in south of Linwood Park, and I wouldn't support it going into the Norwich, Maclean, Rona area if you've already got an enhanced development mechanism. And it'll...
Area, Yanni, because Linwood Intermediate was in that area in Maclean Street. That area is actually amazing in terms of amenity, in terms of what's available, because there's a bus stop right there, there's a mall right over the road, there's reserves. It's a very, very attractive area of Christchurch. And actually, I think if it was done well, it would be fantastic. The difficulty is that... But does the enhanced development mechanism just do it in little clusters, doesn't it? How much of this area becomes an enhanced development mechanism?
Can I also add that the enhanced development mechanism has what we call a sunset clause on it. It will cease to, it's supposed to cease to operate at the end of 2018. So there would be some uptake through the EDM over the next 2 to 3 years, but we're looking at a much wider planning horizon.
Yes, so having heard from the ward councillors, I certainly now would suggest moving that area south of Linwood Park.
Removing it. And generally speaking, the rest of the map?
That one.
So you could walk down Pauline Street into Pamela Street and then down Chelsea into the mall.
And to go Buckley.
Yeah.
I'm not that uncomfortable. I'm actually more uncomfortable with it on the other side of those two main roads, to be fair. I think if you're right over here, there's a lot further distance to walk to those amenity, and it may well, by having this intensification, it may well actually improve the amenity long term if it does take place. No, I don't. I'm not uncomfortable with the stuff around the mall, to be fair. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd be interested in Yanni and Paul's take on that big yellow area on the left there. Obviously, we want more housing, but what the Housing Committee has done is called for a report on the possibility of setting up a rental register because of some of the social outcomes that have arisen from the quakes and the kind of as-is, where-is approach that's happening with houses, and there's no kind of control. So I am a bit concerned about this. Can you...
I'm sorry, what?
It's a lot. I mean, it's a lot in one area.
Are we allowed to say yellow peril?
Look, if I just may reiterate, this area here is existing Living 3 zone. This area to the west of this line is existing Living 3. What we're talking about in this particular topic here is this area, this area, and this area. This area remains as is and will transition to medium density residential, which is effectively the same as L3.
Because of its proximity to the city. Are you suggesting that should be downzoned, that area, in that proximity to the city centre?
I'm probably thinking it should never have been upzoned, but yeah, I can see that.
But actually, yes, because actually all the justification that you've made in many of the other areas should be applied here. You've got Suffolk Street, Percy Street, Nursery Road, tiny narrow streets that can't take any more capacity for cars, traffic, parking, and just because it was L3 before doesn't mean it should continue to be L3 if we've seen perverse outcomes, which we have. So I think there's areas in here that actually do need to be looked at around, the capacity. Again, for those same arguments, you've got areas that have lost schools so having medium density around a school would seem to make a lot of sense. If you don't have a school, then why would you have medium density there? It just seems to me that, again, you've got a really large stretch of an area that is really hard to justify in terms of having to be dense populations.
We can look at this in more detail and come back to you.
I'd like to
It's
get
not
a density
necessarily
map,
a character.
like an existing density map, and also understand special amenity areas, if there's any in this area.
Special amenity areas not
character.
coming through till the second phase of the chapters. I'm not sure, we can give you a density map from the operative plan and what's being proposed in this first 8 chapters, if you like. Is that what you're asking for? So in the operative plan, where the existing density is, and then in this. Yeah. Right.
It's a bit of an exercise.
It is. It's a huge exercise for us to do. We'll do what we can, but I can't say that we would have that ready and prepared for you to come back.
Councillors, in terms of any legal
On
input
Tuesday.
on this issue, it is possible under the RMA for a council to decide to down zone from a high density to a lower density. That is possible. Very few councils, to my knowledge, do it because of the effect it has on people in terms of their investments in property in areas because of current zonings. There will be a number of people who have bought property in this area because of its current zoning. And I wouldn't expect them to be terribly happy with that property entitlement being removed.
Likewise, there's people that have bought property in this existing area with the existing zoning that do not think it should change.
As I said, I don't know how much information and how quickly we can get to you with respect to a map that shows the density regards zoning and how much of it is taken up. We'll do what we can do. We still need further time to get through the program in order to meet this program, so we'll just have to see how we go with that, but we'll do our best.
And I think that's actually a very fair call. Like, these guys are working far too long hours at the moment. I'm just very aware that if you want to downzone, as it were, an area, you are going to be in court. And you're going to have an incredibly compelling reason. And I'm not actually, I know that area well, I'm not seeing the compelling reason.
So the other thing I would then suggest is, given we've got so much existing zoning, I would not support any new zoning to increase intensification and density, because I think there's enough capacity in this area already.
You mean around the KAC? Sorry?
Because we've got one from Andrew that suggests the area from Linwood Park come out of the yellow.
Yeah.
Yeah? Can I put that one first and then put your other 2 areas? That is effectively what Yanni's suggesting. Is there general support for what Andrew's suggesting, which is that this area at the bottom, this area, come out, currently living 2, remains living 2? What is living 2 in the new scheme? Same thing, I suppose.
Density, suburban density overlay.
Right, okay. Is there general support for that? Yeah, I'm taking that as a yes. It's really hard to read. Okay, so thank you, Pauline. You can have a street named after you in this area. Okay, right, so pretty much agreement with that. The other suggestion from Yanni was that the other 2 blocks as well be excluded. I'm not in favour of that because I think there is, I know these areas well, having worked in this area for a couple of years. I think that this is actually potentially a stunning area. I like it a lot. And I like the amenity value around it.
My logic. So the area across from the mall, bad traffic, bad access, bad connection, but putting that to one side, it's got an enhanced development mechanism. So I would say that would be the opportunity. What I don't want is what I saw in Richmond with Housing New Zealand, who put in an existing L3 with urban design controls and everything else that we currently have, a really hideous development that basically destroyed local amenity. It was consented. I don't know if it's been built, and they might be, thankfully, I think, revising the plans. But that could occur as of right, and that's what would really concern me. So given that it's got an enhanced development mechanism, I think that actually intensifies that area. So I don't see the need for it to be put into a thing. Yep.
Just
until it's reviewed, but generally a plan has a life of 10 years.
10 years is the life of a plan under the RMA, but councils don't plan for 10 years. Councils plan long term.
What I'm going to suggest is there general support for Yanni's concept of taking these two blocks out as well, which would leave actually effectively no intensification around the Linwood?
Madam Chair, can I just ask Scott, John, to outline where the EDM area is, that it doesn't actually cover the whole of those two areas?
No. Yep.
It's hard to find out where it's.
There it is. Okay. So I'm just focusing on the intersection at the moment. So if you follow me, the EDM is a set of criteria based on the location of individual sites, based on their distance from schools, supermarkets, bus routes, open space, and a few others. It's not a mapped zone as such. It's a location-based assessment, which is assessed at consent stage. So if someone were to, say, apply for a resource consent here on a site of 1,500 square metres or more, which is the minimum required for an EDM site, they would need to assure the consent planners that they are within X, Y, Z distance of these various criteria. This area, compared to some others, is because of the way the location of everything around here. The EDM is not very consistently applied across this area, and that's an inevitable upshot of having a criteria-based assessment rather than a map-based assessment. So I made this point right at the start, was that what you have here is an area where you could get some medium density development happening, but what you will leave is some areas which don't qualify for EDM, which will be left as lower density zoning effectively. The outcome here is one of urban form and urban character in general, and what you have in zoning this area for medium density is an opportunity to look at an area as a whole and try and get some consistency of urban form across there while having a consistency in zoning. And that's why we felt, taken into account of the EDM, why medium density zoning was appropriate in this particular block. The EDM applies to some extent also to these other areas as well, but it's this particular block where the EDM applies most significantly.
Reasonably quickly so that we can get through to some other things. If you're in favour of Yanni's suggestion of taking those two big yellow blocks, McLean Street and Pamela Street area, out of the thing, can you just raise your hand? Okay, 4. Okay, if you're not, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. David, are you? When did that ever stop you? Okay, tricky question. You might just need to bring it back when there's a few more councillors here.
So the other thing is that because only 10 people made submissions, it really concerns me that the biggest area of intensification, it feels like we haven't actually connected with people to know what's going on, and that does sit in the back of my mind. I do wonder.
Well, I mean, what it would seem to me is this should be something that should be tested by the public by going out for submissions and further submissions. This is just a draft that's going to the ministers. You can see whether the ministers have anything to say about this particular area, although I will say in LERP and in Chapter 6 it does talk about intensification around the KAC, which is what this is about. So there may be comments come back from the minister, then you can revise your decision as when you put it out for notification as to whether you take it out or leave it in. Every chapter, once it's been through with you for a workshop, we've brought 3 or 4 of them back already, and that's our intention, to bring them back for a second time to show the revisions that we've made on the basis of the workshop. And that's, you know, when we talk about the orange colour, that's the second round. Sure. Okay,
Can I
thank you.
just make one, if you turn, just to put it in context of that, all that last discussion, if you turn to the last page in the section 32, you'll see a map showing around the city all the well, these are all the zones that are proposed. The proportion of the eastern, when there's been a focus saying it's got the largest area, but you can look at the proportion against the north and the south of the city. It just gives you some perspective about the quantum.
Right, can you get me out of this map, please, so we can go to the next issue?